Hello and welcome to the first Wellbeing Economy Cymru meeting of 2024. We're really delighted to see you all this evening for what we hope is going to be another thought-provoking and insightful discussion forum from WE Cymru. Wellbeing Economy Cymru is an organisation here in Wales that's working to support the emerging wellbeing economy by helping us all to understand and implement wellbeing economics and showing that there is a viable alternative to how we currently think about and run our economy. And we are part of a global alliance, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is an alliance of organisations and businesses and national hubs like this one, all across the globe. And we're really delighted to welcome people from across Wales, of course, to this meeting, but we have many friends from further afield who are also dropping into the call this evening. And that reflects the fact that Wales is where it's happening. Wellbeing economics is happening here in Wales. And we're delighted to host this forum on a regular basis and welcome friends from around the world to come and hear about and learn from some of the things that we're doing here in Wales, as we're all on this learning journey to understand what is wellbeing economics, where is the wellbeing economy, what does that mean, and how can we all support its growth and development. The wellbeing economy is made up of people, communities and businesses and organisations working together to improve our social, cultural, environmental and economic well-being, delivering social justice and a healthy environment. And in Wales, we have the 7 wellbeing goals of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which describe the wellbeing economy beautifully: prosperous, resilient, healthy for people and planet, more equal, cohesive communities, thriving culture and language, and part of a global community working together to restore balance to the living planet. And this is happening in Wales. If you look around you at the organisations, the businesses, the communities, the inspiring people, change makers in every part of Wales who are standing up for a different set of values and taking action in alignment with those values. Organisations are measuring different outcomes, so not financial metrics and cost and income and efficiency, but outcomes for people and for places and the planet. And that's wellbeing economics. And through this forum, we really enjoy shining a light on some of the inspiring examples of wellbeing economics in action across Wales. And we don't always know ourselves as organisations that we are part of the wellbeing economy, and so that's what we're shining a light on, finding those inspiring change-making examples and saying, yes, this is wellbeing economics in action. And Wales, as I say, is among the leading countries in the world when it comes to wellbeing economics, and it's being put into practice at all levels in Wales, and we very much hope that we're going to see that snowballing, especially as the traditional economy, the mainstream economy, increasingly fails to meet people's needs or serve our well-being. Wellbeing economics is emerging as an alternative, visionary and aspirational, yes, and very much happening. And for tonight's forum, we're really excited to dive into a conversation which clearly feels important, given the level of interest in tonight's meeting: our land, ein tir, and how we can begin to manage it in ways that better serve our collective well-being. And we have a stellar panel this evening: Carwyn Graves, Ken Moon, Sean Brackenbury, and Helen Lecoe. And we'll hear from each of our speakers and invite your comments, questions and reflections after each of them has spoken. So please feel free to think about what you'd like to ask or say in response to what we hear this evening. And hopefully we'll also, if we keep to time, we'll have some time at the end of the meeting for some discussion. So we'd love to share perspectives from across Wales and from the whole system. So we do hope that you'll join the discussion. In Wales, we're passionate about our land. It's in our souls, and we live, if we're lucky, immersed in wonderful landscapes. And there are also bitter and frustrating arguments raging about how we should be managing our land differently, who should benefit from our natural resources, how can we create economic value from those resources, as well as environmental, social and cultural value, and how can we defend our land and the people who depend on it in these changing times. And in the well-being economy, we need to rethink land use so that land serves our well-being and vice versa. And we're hoping for some thought-provoking discussion and insight this evening. And first up, to help us set the context for the discussion, I am really delighted to introduce Carwyn Graves. Carwyn is an author, a public speaker and a gardener from Wales. And Margot, who is one of my colleagues in Wellbeing Economy Cymru, met him during his research for Apples of Wales and has followed his blog and articles on food as he's continued to research what we grow and what we eat in Wales. And that's all been compiled into a fascinating book, Welsh Food Stories. And he's got a new book coming soon in March, Tir, the Land of Wales, which is a history of the landscape of Wales. So there really is no one better to kick us off this evening with some context really for this discussion about land use across Wales, setting that, I suppose, in historical context and cultural context, as well as how we're using our land in our economy. So Carwyn, thanks so much for being part of this evening's meeting. And if you're ready, I would like to ask you to unmute and set some context. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Dawn. Noswaith dda, bob un. Can you hear me? Could someone put a thumbs up or something in the middle of their screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Nothing worse than speaking to a screen without knowing. Good, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen and just as Dawn has said, just give us a bit of context to start us off here. There's obviously many ways that we could take this. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. We'll come back to that later on. But we want to talk about land use in Wales. And I want to just lay some framework now in terms of what's on the screen there, before maybe opening this up, maybe in some surprising ways later on. I'll come back as a panelist later on in the session after we've heard from the others. So what this is put in front of you really is a snapshot of where we are right now. These are all publicly available figures, and for some of you, they are bread and butter. For each of these, though, does need a bit of unpacking. The first stat that you can see, hopefully on your screen there, is that 95% of Welsh land is used either for farming or for forestry. That breakdown between the two is roughly 80% farming, and then the other 15% being forestry. That forestry use is recent, and even the division between farming and forestry in terms of the history of land use in Wales is a recent one. We might come back to that later on. But there are divisions, there are categories that we use that don't always serve us well. And this is a good case in point. If I could hold it up on the screen, I would. But there's the Soil Association recently brought out a report on regenerative small-scale forestry on farms. We might be coming full circle. Oliver Rackham, some of you will be familiar with, an academic now departed from Cambridge, the expert on British woodlands, suggests that most of the ecological loss that's happened in Welsh woodlands over the last few decades has come from the lack of coppicing. And yes, coppicing was previously very widespread in Wales. So 95% of our use is now either farming or forestry. We'll come back to the farming later. That provides something in the region of 4% of employment. Just to contextualize that, that is a significantly higher figure than the figure you'd get for England, say, or the United States, where the comparable figure depends exactly how you count, but it's around 1%. So by that measure, farming is significantly more important in terms of Welsh employment than it is in those comparable economies and societies. But again, in terms of contextualizing this, we're taking the long view here, I think. Um, Wales was the first society where fewer than 50% of the workforce were employed in agriculture. And that came in the early 19th century. So we have a long history of farming being, in one sense, relatively marginal. Then the third point here, as you can see, this form of land use, farming, produces around 0.7% of gross value added. Now, that's a stat. There's comments we could make, and I'm sure there are people in the room better qualified than me to unpick what gross value added um, should mean for us going forward, actually, and whether it's a useful measure at all. But in terms of the way the economy is set up right now, it is marginal, and that's the point of having it there. And then we come to the fourth thing here about land ownership. Massively important question. In terms of the history of Wales, it's been incredibly contested. There's a long history of uprisings, actually, to do with land ownership, of tenants. Land wars was a phrase in the 19th and the 18th century, and you can trace this right back into the Middle Ages. But we are now at a place, and I think this is salient, we're now at a place where roughly 75% of farms in Wales, the average size of which are quite small by UK standards, around 100 acres, roughly 75% of farms in Wales are owner occupied, and that's the highest percentage in Great Britain. That is actually the culmination of about 2 centuries of change, and from one narrative of this of struggle. And it is something that could be counted, and I think many people in Wales would count, as a significant part of our social capital, particularly in rural areas. We are in a situation where that percentage may decrease substantially over the coming decade or two. And certainly the feeling, I think, in the farming community is that that figure is on its way down rapidly. If we don't count that as a loss, I think we need to account for why we don't count it as a loss. So another thing there for discussion. And then the final point here, which I've separated a bit, is not a statistic. It's something a little bit deeper, which is this idea of subsistence versus commodity. The global economy that all of us in the West participate to a very significant extent in is commodity driven. And that has shaped farming and land use to an enormous extent, reshaped it over the last, over the course of a lifetime, really, from post-war onwards. Previous to that, subsistence was a very important part of the economy. Now, even by raising the word subsistence, for some people, the thought arises, well, are you talking about going back to some sort of peasant economy? But there's actually a large gap between a hand-to-mouth way of life and fully plugged in to a commoditized way of life. And that gap may well be generative, it may be fruitful in terms of thinking about land use, in terms of thinking about something like a well-being economy. So I put it to you that is something to be thought about quite seriously, subsistence and commodities, and how that frames land use in Wales going forward. There we are. Slightly facetiously, and then the money. Again, some of you are very familiar with this, but right now we're coming out of a system where farms across Wales, of which there are about 35,000, where they receive £30,000 in basic payments. That sum of 30,000 is going to drop very significantly as things stand. Every farm is different, but you're talking about going down from 30,000 to going down, if they opt into the new sustainable land use scheme, sustainable farming scheme, going down to something much more like 10,000, say, depending exactly on the nature of the farm. So very significant drop which is going to change the way the land is used and perhaps have unintended consequences in terms of land use. But Wales is small. To bring that money back up in terms of the capital that is around even in the UK would not require an enormous investment, only something like £1 billion. And I say that fully aware of what I'm saying. So hopefully let me try and stop sharing that. Hopefully that just provides a few pointers and a few things to provoke thought, and we'll come back. I'll unpack some of those things in terms of historic land use and food a bit more later on.
Super. Yes, very thought-provoking and a great start. Thank you. Some really interesting statistics there. And as you say, if you look at something like GVA, farming seems of sort of marginal importance to our economy. And that's really the problem, isn't it, with traditional ways of looking at how we live and work and measuring them in these very reductive ways. And as someone mentions in the chat, actually, if you count all the subsidies, who knows? But yeah, really thought-provoking, clearly challenging and changing landscape for farmers. And I think that's one of the things that we'd love to explore more as we get on in this evening's discussion. So thank you, Carwyn. Great start. And lots to think about. But we'll move on, and really I am delighted now to welcome, and we'll hear a bit more from Carwyn later on, which is why I'm moving on now. But I'm really delighted to welcome our next speaker and panellist, and that is Ken Moon, who is chair of the Pontypridd Land Society. Ken has years of experience in the environmental and voluntary sector here in Wales, and some of you may know him as the admin for the Facebook group Land for Sustainable Development in Wales, and he's also a community mentor in Rhondda Cynon Taf and a social business mentor with Cwmpas. But it's in his role as chair of Tir Pontypridd, a new community land trust, that he will speak this evening. And Ken's experience with community land trusts is about making sure land is used wisely for everyone's benefit. So Ken, really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello. I'll just bring the slides up if you would, please.
Yeah, I will share your screen. Yeah.
I've been having imposter syndrome, anxiety attacks all week, so thank you for the introduction. That's made me feel much better about myself. So before we sort of go to the slides, I just sort of say a little bit about why we started Tir Pontypridd. And it's largely through supporting community groups with asset transfers and seeing the challenges groups faced, just accessing land and accessing buildings, and the hoops that communities often have to go through just to get permission to be able to access a relatively small part of their community, whether that's a building or an area of land. So during lockdown, I was asked by a councillor, I was having some challenges at the employer I was with, and the councillor said, okay, if you could do anything with your life, what would you be doing? Good question. I've asked myself that a lot. So if I didn't have a mortgage to pay off, etc., I would be doing this. And this is I would be helping communities to access land, because land rights and land access is a passion of mine, and it has been since studying and learning about the Land is Ours, a campaign organisation based in England. And I kind of lost interest when I couldn't find much on Wales. There wasn't at the time a huge amount of writing out there, and there still isn't. I think Carwyn Graves's book is something I'm really keen to read, having just learnt about it. Yeah, and there's some historical stuff around changing land use patterns, but most of Welsh history, when you look at it, tends to be about the Normans and Welsh princes, and not a huge amount of it is actually about Welsh people and our relationship with the landscape. And I'm interested in how we delve deeper into that. So yeah, we're a community organisation. At the moment, I've managed to drag 5 or 6 community members on board with my crazy passion to basically start securing land around the town where we live for sustainability. So Catherine Doyle, who you see on the bottom right there, she's our marketing and promotions person. And the other people around the screen there are all community members. And we've just taken on somebody called Wayne Chicken as a trustee. And he's got a background in banking and finance, which is very helpful, but his main interest is in data. And he's managing our membership platform, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we're going to be working towards incorporation this year. But yeah, the reason we're set up, passionate about land for sustainability. So next slide, please. Why do we want land for sustainability? Because we want to do some of these amazing things that communities and community organisations around Wales have done. The nearest sort of project to us that's doing this in any meaningful scale way would be Welcome to Our Woods up in the top of Treherbert. And then their relationship is with a public sector body, and they were going for a long-term lease while I was working with them on secondment. And it took them 10 years to get to the point where Welcome to Our Woods said, yes, let's work with you on coming up with a plan for our community. That's a decade of work and engagement and conversation and lobbying and et cetera. It shouldn't take that long. You know, it should take maybe a couple of years to build some houses for the community. 10 years just to get an agreement to work with the community is too much, really, especially given where we are in terms of the climate crisis. There's some other great examples there: community energy, community housing, community food growing, all things that we could be doing if we had access to the land around us. So next slide, please. Okay, so we know why we're all here. We don't live in a well-being economy. We have multiple crises that we're trying to deal with. The picture there is of a group of young people from Pontypridd. They're all in their teenage years now and incredibly embarrassed by this photo. My son's recently turned down an opportunity to be part of a project with the Museum of Wales because he's a teenager and he doesn't want to get embarrassed in school. It's fair enough. But the main point I want to pick up on is that we're in the midst of a governance crisis around these issues, that we are seeing some leadership and we are seeing some of that from within Welsh government, but we are also experiencing a crisis of governance, that if we're in a genuine crisis situation, and there are so many of these crises affecting us, we should be in an emergency response, and we don't seem to be seeing that. So that emergency response maybe needs to come from our communities and be community-led if it's not going to be government-led. Next slide, please. Right, so what are the community-led responses that we are seeing? So I mentioned community growing, community green spaces, community energy, community housing. These are all things we're seeing pilots, we're seeing some great examples of, we're seeing more and more starting to emerge, but they are still sort of few and far between within the areas in which people live. So Gower Power on the Gower, a great project, but there isn't a Pontypridd Power, there isn't a Newport Power, these things aren't in every community, they are still in isolation and dotted around Wales. And some of the challenges that they're facing are around finance, so getting the money, but actually if you've got access to the land, that's not that big a challenge. Permission to just be there and do it, and that's a challenge in itself. And then the access to the land is usually the main sticking point for most of these projects going ahead. And I say access rather than ownership, because sometimes if you can have the conversation with the right person and the right people, you can get permission to do something on a piece of land. You don't necessarily need to own it, but owning it can be easier. So the next slide. Right, I blame this person for where we are. So for those of you not familiar with the history series that's aimed at children whose name are Horrible Histories, that's William the Conqueror. Bit of a trope, but fundamentally, William the Conqueror stepped foot in Britain and said, I own this. And that fundamentally changed our relationship with land between the people of the country and the crown. All land from that point onwards became the property of the crown. And that hadn't existed in history before and until William the Conqueror did that. It didn't even exist in Normandy. He brought that with him as something he wanted to trial and make happen in England, as was. And then from there on, obviously there'll be historians in the room who might disagree with me. We can have that conversation later. So there on, so Colin mentioned enclosures, and that, you know, the Welsh landscape we see today is a product of that history. So landscape and landscape ownership and use has changed over time. And a large part of that change has been a erosion of what we understand as the commons. That at one point in history, we all had rights to the landscape. They were negotiated, and they were tended to be negotiated locally between the people who lived in the area and whoever happened to have the biggest sword. Then William the Conqueror changed that fundamental relationship. It took hundreds of years to get to where we are now, but it was from that point onwards. Dispossession of people from the land led to surges in poverty, victim blaming, sowed the seeds of rebellion and revolution, and also led ultimately to the Industrial Revolution. You know, urbanization, we had a surplus of population, and it created the bedrock from which capitalism grew. And then that model was then taken around the world and became colonialism. So very brief history. So 0.6% of the population now own more than 50% of land in England and Wales. So I'm very interested to see Carwyn's stat on Wales specific, and it's really interesting that there's that disparity between England and Wales. Next slide, thank you. Right. So again, back to why we're doing Tir Pontypridd, because of this exclusive ownership of land, that we're no longer accessing land in common. You either own the land or you don't own the land. And if you don't own the land, you're going to people to ask for the permission of the owner for access to the land. So that is the cult of exclusion, if you like, that we're now living within. So for a community, even if it's publicly owned land, they're having to go and influence either the policy and the planning system or local government, or have conversations with a health board or whoever it might be, to basically beg permission or prove that they can be in a space to do what they want to do with that land. And some of that's reasonable, and some of it's, you just think, really, do you need that for that particular purpose? Is this just excessive? So access to the public realm. So, you know, just being able to do something in a town and put on an event, you often have to jump through lots of hoops to get permission from a local authority or whoever is responsible for that town centre. And we're also seeing, especially in England, lots of public realm spaces becoming privatised. And we've seen that a lot with HS2. Short tenancy agreements tend to be what are preferred by public bodies. And also that can also favour community groups. But funders want to see asset transfers and leases or long-term tenancies, which sometimes groups aren't ready to do. You've also got the opportunity of co-producing that vision with a public body, which is what they're doing at the top of Treherbert. Welcome towards the NRW. And then the final option is purchase land on the open market, which the land comes on the market really quickly, and you've got to raise the money really quickly. And if you're not very good at turning things around on a pin, that land can be sold to the highest bidder before you've even pulled a business plan together. So there's something that needs to happen around that. So what's basically happening is communities and individual groups are burning up a huge amount of money just to get to the point. Money, resources, time, well-being, sanity, all the rest of it, just to get access to the land. So we're interested in how we unleash the power of community. So next slide, please. And one way of doing that is to persuade government bodies to change policy and change practice, and to make it easier for communities to access land. And that's what they're doing in Scotland. They're looking at changing the way in which communities have the right to buy land, but also the right to say, that land you've got over there, Mr. Landowner, we could use that for something in our community. We'd like you to sell it to us. So you've got a not a willing seller clause in the Community Empowerment Act of 2015, where communities can actually start demanding land from landowners. They still have to pay a fair price for it, but if a landowner's not using a particular land for anything in particular, the community can go, we like that, we want that, we need it for our community sustainability. And in Scotland, we currently have 500,000 acres in community ownership. Those figures a couple of years old now. And that's led to a whole range of things. We've seen the outpouring of community energy projects, community land-based projects, community housing, community woodland enterprises in Scotland, which we're really struggling to see at scale in Wales. Okay, next slide, please. So how are people approaching this situation in Wales? We're basically pinching this 4CGs model, and the approach they're taking is what we're doing. So Cymdaithas Cynnal a Gifnogi Ceffyn Gwlad are buying their town, building by building, asset by asset. They're buying their town back. They currently own some, you can see just from this picture here how many properties they now own within their own town. And I just saw that and I thought, we could do that for land. Let's try this for land in RCT. So next slide. Okay, so this is how we're doing it. I've got long COVID. I don't have the stamina to do this quickly. And the rest of the group were made up of community volunteers. So everyone's busy doing other projects as well. So we're starting small. We're learning as we go, and we're going to grow organically. We're not going to go with funding or opportunities that cause us to rush and overstep ourselves and put us in a position where we might collapse and fall apart, like I've seen with community organizations. So we set up as a community association. We set up our membership platform on Patreon last year and discovered very quickly that Patreon's very expensive. But the way we're setting the membership up is that those that can afford the least pay the least. And if you're going to buy an annual membership with us to save a bit of money, you actually get much more of a benefit from doing that if you're on the lower end of the scale than if you're on the higher. So we've been using the donut economics model to determine how we charge for membership. So we currently have 35 members, and we're about to launch a website and change our platform from Patreon to Member Mojo, and that's what Wayne's been working on. And we're hoping to incorporate as a community benefit society this year. And we're currently having conversations with a community councillor in a nearby area. There's a landowner who wants to sell, and the community are quite keen to create some allotments. So that will be our first project. We're looking at about £30,000. It's a reasonable amount of money to raise for us. So that's what we're looking to do. The approach we're going to take is that each community will be determining how land is used. We've got the broad remit of sustainability. So as long as it's within sustainability, we can have a conversation with the community about it. If they want to use it for dog walking, if they just want to secure it and hold it for well-being, we're happy with that. It captures and holds land against an uncertain future. That priority might change over time. So we're going to hold it and we're going to keep it. And the land we're looking at is the land around our town, which there's an old Welsh word called the frith, which is the marginal land between intensively farmed lands and extensively farmed uplands. We're rebranding the frith as the space around where we live, and that's what we're looking to access. It's called loads of other things in academic circles. We're not interested in what they're called. We're calling it the frith. Okay, right. I think that's pretty much me. I think there might be one more. Yeah, no, that's me. Thank you. Sorry if I overran.
Well, what a interesting and inspiring presentation. I know there are many in the room who are looking to follow and learn from what you guys are doing in Pontypridd, and as you've mentioned there, you're also looking and learning from others in Wales. And I was struck by your point that there are so many kind of great pilot projects and case studies across Wales, but that actually we need this all to be happening with much more urgency and at greater scale. And yeah, fascinating to sort of take that bird's eye view of a place and then start to map the ownership, and it will be nice to see the land around Pontypridd transferring into community control or ownership as the time goes by. But sounds like a very exciting journey that you're on, and bringing with you lots of experience from challenges and other projects and learnings from what works and what some of the pitfalls are. So that was apparent in your slides there, Ken. Lucy from Social Farms and Gardens has a comment or a question. Lucy, please do come in.
Thanks very much. Yeah, sorry, I've got my camera off. I am listening intently, but I'm also cooking tea. Yeah, so really, really interesting stuff, Ken. Yeah, I was just wondering how you're proposing to interact with the local authority and perhaps what they're planning to do with that land in terms of their local development plan, and what the landowners, those sorts of barriers. What how you're intending to sort of run roughshod over their plans, or are you gonna sort of try and work with them to change maybe some housing developments that they've got planned? For instance, those areas around towns are very, quite valuable bits of land that owners like to develop for housing to get the most sort of capital receipt out of, aren't they? So yes, just interested in that. Thanks.
Yeah, we've got an interesting example. There's an area of Pontypridd called the Graig, which, if you know or been to Pontypridd, as you come into town, it's the highest density housing, and it's one of the most deprived bits of Pontypridd, but also is a beautiful hill. And people like to use it for dog walking, etc., etc. And people think it's open space and it's a common, but it's actually privately owned. And the landowner he originally wanted to sell it for 75 grand. He was approached, a group of people came together, a lot of whom have now become Pontypridd members, and they wanted to buy that. And they approached that, they raised enough money to start having a conversation. And the guy turned around and he had a caveat on the land sale, which is there's a certain clause which means that if it's developed, it adds the value, and the seller gets a percentage of the sale, which you see a lot of around urban communities. You see a lot in with rural land as well, where farmers want to keep land in farming, and they'll put a caveat on that if it ends up as housing, it's done partly by some farmers to put people off from developing land, and it's done by others to cash in on a sale of land. And this guy was definitely looking to cash in. And as soon as this community group approached him and said, we want to preserve the land as it is, the price of the land shot up by 15 grand. And the community just said, we're out. If you're going to play that game, we're out. So we're looking to act as a broker between communities and landowners, whether they're public sector or private, so that we can have, as a community, a conversation with people who are looking to sell land. We're quite a close-knit area, and most of the people that own land around the area live in the area. So it changes the relationship. It takes it out of, this is a sale in the private market, to this is a sale within your community. These are the people within your community you're trying to maximize a profitable return on, and it just changes the conversation. So that's part of what we're looking to do. With local authority, I'm glad to see Jen on the call, who's soon to join Trevalis, and also Cunham Valley Housing, and others are all got an interest in land at the moment and looking to buy land. Where a housing association or mutual wants to buy land for a project, we're keen to have a conversation and a relationship with them, because it might be that they're better placed to purchase it than we are, and they might have ideas for community projects that we would like to see happen. So we're not seeing this as a competitive relationship, we're seeing this as a collaborative one. And we're hoping to change the way in which our local authority converses with the community about land and about how land is used. We've got a quarry on our doorstep that the council sold to the quarry owners and then tried to stop them through the planning process. It's a very controversial scheme. It's right next to a community. Should that land have become a quarry when it's right next to housing? If that community had owned the land, the conversation would have been very different. So, that's where we're trying to get to. It's a vision.
we're just starting out, we'll make mistakes and we'll learn on the way.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, really interesting learning that you'll benefit from. And I was also struck by the leadership from Scotland in terms of making it easier for communities to access their land. And Scotland is another wellbeing economy government, and interesting to see how those kind of policy levers and changes can be used to make it easier to access land, which, as you say, is a constraint for all of those sorts of community projects and community empowerment that you've spoken of.
And I think in Wales, there have been conversations with senior politicians in Wales about bringing some of that to Wales, and it just seems to have stagnated. But I think when you do something and make stuff happen, it can drive policy change, and that's what we're looking to do: is start realizing this. And if other, you mentioned communities might follow us. I'd rather communities leapfrog us. Take what we're doing. Take the model. It's not our model, it's the mutual model. It's been around for hundreds of years. Take the model, apply it for the land where you live, and jump ahead of us and get on with it and do it.
Yes, well, hopefully there are people in the room feeling inspired already. So fantastic work, Ken. Thanks so much for sharing, and hopefully further discussions to be had as the evening goes on. Thank you very much. So we'll move on now to the third of our speakers. And in these forums, we love to have a diversity of perspectives, really, from different parts of the system. So Sean Brackenbury is coming to us from a business called Terrafix Soil Solutions. But as a passionate and very practical environmentalist, Sean is able to engage at all levels and has huge enthusiasm and knowledge around land. His initial work on the Gower Commons back in 2000, when one of our committee members was working closely with Sean at that time, led to him finding a use for the trees and shrubs that were removed from the common into biochar. So Sean is now internationally recognised as a soil scientist and really at the leading edge of carbon capture, and his love of the wild spaces of Wales and their importance drives everything he does. So Sean, we're really delighted to have you with us on the call this evening, and please talk to us about how you think we could better manage lands in Wales to serve our well-being.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Sorry about this small technical hiccup.
No probs. Is it working?
There we go. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, we can see that. And now if you can go into your presentation mode, that should be fine.
Okay, can you see the correct screen now?
We're still looking at your behind the scenes mode.
Right. There we go.
That's it.
Are we there now? Fantastic. Wow, that was a relief. Okay, so yeah, good evening all. Thank you for the introduction. So so Sean Brackenbury, I work for a company called Terrafix. So we were set up back in 2019 as a collaboration to look at ways in which we could drive carbon sequestration and put that not just at the heart of habitat management, but also at the heart of civil engineering operations. So it was, how do we build carbon sequestration across the piece? So this is from land management right the way through to the built environment. So what we do, we look at a raft of different habitat types, so from semi-natural habitats through to road embankments, rails, river embankments, acid mine sites, and these are all sites that we consider when we're looking at the potential for carbon sequestration. So just to let you know, we're based down in Haverfordwest, and we work right the way throughout the UK. So what I'm going to talk about is this whole idea of carbon dioxide drawdown, but with a specific focus on something called, and I'm afraid there's a lot of terminology in this, something called pyrogenic carbon capture and storage. So this is quite simply using biomass to create a stable form of carbon. So this is our assertion that economic value will be added to the wellbeing economy by using waste biomass for the sequestration of carbon away from the atmosphere within processes and products. So the starting point for this entire conversation is all around biomass. So plants are nature's natural carbon capture system. So day in, day out, they're absorbing carbon dioxide from the oxygen from the atmosphere, releasing oxygen and building biomass. So this is our planetary engine. This is the thing that enables us to exist, that makes our ecosystems functional. So when I was back in college, so this is back in the mid-90s, around about 350 parts per million was considered to be the tipping point for CO2 in the atmosphere. And of course, we're now up, and when I checked earlier today, at 423 parts per million. So we are absolutely in uncharted territory at the moment. And you know, it's already been mentioned that we're in a climate crisis. And what we need to do is not only reduce the amount of carbon we're emitting, but we have to aggressively take carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's the terminology that's now being used. You know, we are in the last chance saloon, if you like, of CO2 abatement. So we need to be dealing with this, and we need to be proactively dealing with this. So there are a number of different ways in which we can actually deal with carbon sequestration. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these. So there are obviously changes in land management. So this is things like, you know, peatland, woodland creation, improving the functionality of existing habitats, so getting those into the best condition they can possibly be. There's ocean storage, there's marine biota, and then there are technological solutions then, things like direct air capture. And then along with that, there's a whole raft of technologies then that sit underneath this category called biomass energy with carbon capture and storage, so BECCS. So within that, there is something which is a very, again, a large long word here, but you know, in terms of pyrogenic carbon capture, energy and storage. So this is what we're doing, and it's quite simply using the capacity of plants to draw down CO2, which is then converted into very stable forms of carbon that then can persist in the environment for millennia. So of course, once we've created these stable forms of carbon, they're then locked away from the atmosphere, and that means, you know, that is taken away. That's a physical amount of carbon that's removed. So how does this all relate to Wales? Well, something that's quite often cited when you're having this biochars, as they're often known, is that, you know, there's a need to grow material to create the carbon, to sequester it, to then put it back into the ground. And that's not the case at all. There is a huge amount of waste biomass within our environment. And when I say waste, I mean biomass that's not utilized for any other purpose. So, I mean, coppicing has already been mentioned. Coppicing would be a great source of material. And of course, coppicing historically was used for charcoal production. And there are significant parallels between carbonisation and the production of charcoal. So, for example, you know, we've got forestry residues, invasive non-native species, other woody biomasses. These can all be converted into these stable forms of carbon and then redeployed within the environment. And then, of course, we've got secondary waste streams, so anything from waste woods right the way through to organic wastes. So here we're talking about things like sewage sludges. So where we, within our water sector, we process sewage sludge to generate energy. That sewage sludge ends up creating a cake. That cake is very, very organic. It's a very organic rich material. And again, that can also be converted into a stable form of refractory carbon. So what does this look like in practice? So this is a very, very sort of simplified diagram, but on the left-hand side, what we have is our carbon being drawn down by a biomass. So whatever that biomass might be. So it could be trees, it could be the invasive species, it could be coppicing, or it could be secondary biomasses like we've mentioned, the cardboards, the sludges, that sort of thing. It then goes through some sort of vegetation management process, so some sort of processing. That would then pass into a carbonisation plant. That carbonisation plant generates thermal energy. So there's an energy generation element to this, and that thermal energy can be utilised within the processes. And off the back of that, we produce our stable carbon, our refractory carbon, our biochar, which is fantastic. And it's great to produce it. Of course, once you produce it, you need to find somewhere to deploy it. You have to put it into long-term storage. And putting it into long-term storage is best achieved by finding what that material can be used for in the best possible way. So what we're talking about here, for example, is how we store carbon, and the long-term storage for this refractory carbon works particularly well in things like tree planting schemes, for example. And there's a raft of papers. I mean, if you Google biochar, there is something, I don't know, 17 million odd papers, 17 million odd hits on the internet and growing on a daily basis. So you know, it can be utilised in tree planting schemes. You can use it in habitat restoration programs. So we utilise it significantly in mine restoration. This is the old Victorian mine sites. Within Europe, it's used in concretes, it's used in tars, paints, plasters, and insulation material. It can also be used as a filtration material, so for removing nutrients, used in microplastic scrubbing, used in road runoff, it can be used in gas exchange. And of course, all this material can be reprocessed, reused.
I didn't wipe the
fractured material created, and then it can go back. And then finally, this is circular to circular. So this is landscape to landscape. So what does this mean in totality? So what you have here is sort of a summary of how this might work. So in number one, you've got volume reduction. So you can reduce the volume of a waste stream at the point where it's created. So this obviously reduces the number of journeys on a life cycle basis. You can get energy generation through this. So there's the additionality of energy and energy production. There's carbon sequestration, which is quantifiable sequestration. So this is auditable, and carbon sequestration certificates can be issued against this. It's a physical amount of material. Product commercialization. So these are things that we need to make because the process has to be self-funding. You know, it has to have a marketplace to be able to deliver this service within. And then, of course, those deferred costs. And I think the final thing I'd say to add on to this is that I think it's quite important that, you know, this is approached from the perspective of it's not a single large installation which would deliver carbon sequestration through this type of process. It'll be a distributed network of small interventions. So it'll be lots of small interventions, you know, throughout a country, throughout an area that'll deliver this. So it's lots of small interventions which will make the difference. So so that's it. So that's my sort of conversation around carbonisation. And what I should also maybe just close by saying is that this started with an MSc project that was undertaken by Swansea University back in 2012, which then grew into 20 master's projects, which then grew into 4 PhD projects, which then grew into actual deployment, which then grew into trial sites, which then grew into working with larger contractors and civil engineering companies, which is, you know, it's scaled and scaled and scaled and scaled. So so I think it's a good example, I think, of how a small idea can have a greater impact the more people you can get involved in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Now your next challenge is to stop sharing. There we go. Well done. Yeah, great to hear about that really world-leading work that you're doing, and keen to see that practice expanded. Huge opportunity there. If anyone has a question or a comment or a reflection on anything that Sean has shared or from any of our other speakers, the invitation is still there. I'm looking for your raised hands, and please do come in. But yes, creating value whilst also regenerating the natural environment. Really inspiring to see the work you're doing, and some good discussion in the chat. And the question about pollution of our rivers, which I know will come up again from our next speaker. Thank you, Sean. Great to have you with us. I'm not seeing any questions, which means that we can move straight on to our next speaker. Now, Helen Lecoq, many of you know, is joining us from Banai Brycheiniog National Park, where she's a senior planner. And Helen has spoken really powerfully in this forum before, because Banai Brycheiniog National Park are embedding donut economics into their strategy and their operations, and that is very inspiring work. Helen, you had sent me a video as a backup in case you weren't able to join us live. But as you're here, are you planning to share your slides live, or would you like me to share your video?
Yeah, apologies for all the confusion. Yes, thank you ever so much. Yeah, I'm happy to just share my screen and talk if that's easiest all
Yes,
round.
please do. Yeah, we love to have you live in the room. That sounds fab.
Okay, I will attempt to do this. I'm hoping you're seeing my presentation.
Not quite. No, we're not yet. Oh, here it comes. Yeah, it's coming. There we go. Great.
Great. Okay, so thank you everyone, and apologies that I wasn't quite here for the beginning of this session. I was actually engaging with some of our more active land management groups within the national park about how we can take forward a collaborative element towards river restoration, funnily enough. So yeah, so I'm a little bit between two meetings, so apologies for that. As Dawn's already said, I'm a chartered town planner. I currently manage the policy team here in the National Park. I've worked for Banai for, 17 years, mostly in planning policy. And more recently, actually, I should say, I've been working on the management plan for the National Park, which is that beautiful image that you can see there. By means of context, to add to that, national parks are, by their very essence, contested spaces. They are public resources that have been designated for the nation, but primarily from private land. And that landscape that we see, which I love by its definition, is a living, working landscape. Now, ownership of this landscape is both then physical, by deed, and in law, and conceptual for the nation. So we mediate through those through our purposes and duty, but conflict remains, which is a way of saying that the park is many different things to many different people. It's their livelihood, it's a playground, it's where they live, their cultural heritage. It's something that they have huge passion for. And just have to see about the argument of what we name the park is how people have a sense of ownership of that. And we, as an authority, as a planning authority, we have to manage these competing needs, multiple competing, and we are tasked with doing that in the interest of the nation, but with a management structure which is heavily focused in the local. And it's a task that we know we don't always quite right, and certainly one that we can't do alone, which is where planning comes in. Now, I'm a planner, and our role is to regulate the use of land in the public interest. I spend a lot of my career on beautiful, pristine fields, looking at a gorgeous expanse of mountains and assessing that beautiful open space for its capacity to accommodate new housing. And that often reminds me of this sketch with my clip on in hand. I'm standing there thinking, am I actually the baddie here? Because I'm about to transform something which is really, really beautiful and open and green into something completely different. And I guess it depends, though, on your perspective, because if you're homeless and that land is going to build a much needed affordable house, then I'm a hero, right? But if you're the curlew that returns every year, I'm worse than the very much of the best baddies. And it just goes to show, actually, how contested a space that we occupy when we talk about land use. We ask so much of our land. We exploit what it provides, be it spiritual enrichment, clean water, clean air, food to eat, and all of that set out in this image. You know, this image that we have here, we use as part of our corporate identity. But this image is benign. What lies beneath is systemic failure against a whole range of our planetary boundaries, from the failings of the designation to maintain a diverse biodiversity, wildlife habitats, to maintain water quality, to prevent critical levels of phosphorus and nitrogen entering into the water systems, to prevent invasive non-native species from proliferating. But at the same time, all the natural things that are actually critically wrong. And we've also got huge social problems. And housing is one massive problem in this national park. You know, the value of our land in relation to the way we provide house price housing for our communities is such that actually what we end up with massive levels of deprivation, or essentially either just a playground for, you know, rich retirees to come in. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's huge social capital, but there are huge issues with that. So as Dawn said, we've embodied this approach in the donut economics model to really set out this snapshot, this blood pressure reading about vital signs of the park, to show us what lies beneath this benign landscape, and to help us understand actually that through the management of our land in a holistic way, we potentially will address those challenges. And it was really this slide has been around ever since we started talking about the management plan, but it's big shifts, you know, it's big shifts in a whole range of things, from land management, from extractive to regenerative, transport, private to public, that health, from curative to preventative. These are systemic changes that are needed, and yet the policy framework that I have as a planner, you know, the planning system is like essentially the only powers that we have as a National Park Authority to actually influence significant levels of change, talks and thinks in silos, and that is huge problems. And policy normally operates in a silo. It concentrates on one small part of the system at the time. We put effort into cleaning up the mess made by the system rather than dealing with the problem at root. And I often will talk about river pollution in this way. So we think about the huge challenges our river are facing, and that top image there is actually an algal bloom, taken a picture of an algal bloom that was taken a few years ago in the Usk in Brecon, in a beautiful part of the world, and actually, you know, huge systemic decline. And we rant and we rave about the fact that it's because of the changes in agriculture that have brought this about. Well, yes, potentially, but why have we had change in agriculture? Why are we not thinking about the fact that really it's the way that our food system is creating is actually causing huge problems? And so you're giving me a mechanism through the planning system to be able to solve one part of it, but you're not giving me the tools to be able to address that systemically and to think about what's actually driving the systemic failure. So in policy development, what we then talk about is the need for both sticking plasters to address the immediate challenge, to stop the things getting worse, but also to talk about those sort of mission-led approach to bring about the holistic change that is needed. And so we can talk about the sticking plasters, so how the limits of the possible now. So we have and we are helping hopefully to increase food production diversity across the park through removing some of those planning barriers, creating a local development order which will help bring about permitted development rights, or a version of permitted development rights for small-scale agricultural production that potentially wouldn't necessarily just have that ease of movement through the system. And we can talk about how existing policy can be utilised in a better way to be able to facilitate non-traditional agricultural practice and make sure that that isn't disadvantaged through the system. But that's just picking at the edges. It is just putting a sticking plaster over wider problem. What we actually need to be able to do is to change up the system, to reimagine future planning policy. So we're not just thinking about us and our extractive processes and what we need out of the system, but wouldn't it be amazing if we could actually use land use development plans of the future, which were developed around ecologically coherent areas, you know, areas where there is there's a ecological logic to why we're planning, and a river catchment is a particular one because actually that provides a whole range of ecosystem services which we exploit. And potentially what we could do is make sure that when we're developing that we link up the management of that river catchment with the development that happens and is exploiting those ecosystem services. So we consider the relationship between ecosystem services, their exploitation, and we work towards a balance. So development that then is regenerative and distributed by design. So it ensures that if it's taking an ecosystem service like clean water, that it is returning that clean water back in the same way. Same with carbon. So we're looking at carbon positive development, distributed by design in terms of ensuring that actually those, what we take out of the environment, that we can put back. And that will obviously then relate back to economic distribution as well. If we can maintain those services within that catchment, within that river catchment, and produce food within the catchment, and that's a local wealth generation as well. So what we're looking for is service by viable, sustainable local food networks that have the infrastructure in place to meet those needs. I probably could talk in far more detail, but we haven't got much time, I realise that. So I'm just going to say thank you so much. My contact details are up on screen. Our management plan, which talks about this in much more detail, dyfodol Banau the future. I'll put the link on the web. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Helen. Great and thought-provoking presentation there. And yeah, the importance of the planning system and the levers that are available in the planning system, but the limits of those. And really appreciate your point about the need for systems thinking and a much more holistic approach. And of course, that's what we think of in well-being economics and donut economics, as you've outlined there, that interconnectedness of everything, and how important it is to find a way to make those decisions much more holistically and break down the silos between decisions that are being made at different levels. So yes, the challenge between the sticking plaster and the mission. Yayan, thanks for putting your hand up. I'd love to bring you in if you've got a question or a reflection to share.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just switching the camera on there. Yeah, just a question for Helen there. Really, really interesting, and fantastic stuff happening with the management plan of the park. It's great to see how that will unfold. I don't know if you've got detail on the nitty gritty of the conversion to a more regenerative way of managing the land and how that will look for the current tenants and farmers up in that area, the guys who have access to the common land and things like that. Are you looking at sort of subsidizing income foregone and things like that? Do you have any detail around the model you might be proposing?
Sorry, you dropped out around subsidy, and then I missed the bit before that. Sorry, after that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Shall I repeat?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I've got to remember what I said now. Yeah. So, how do you have any detail around the model you might be using to create that regenerative land management approach from farmers. Are you looking at perhaps subsidising income foregone, or how will you manage that in terms of the viability of the businesses?
In terms of farm subsidy, obviously we are a very small organisation. We employ about 67 people. We have a very, very small budget. We are not essentially ever going to be in a position where we can subsidise agricultural practice. What we seek to do is to work collaboratively with the land managers in order to help develop plans and programmes which can then attract in funding from elsewhere. We currently work with a range of different agricultural businesses and farm clusters that are looking to be the solution themselves, and we help them facilitate their development. But in terms of us, as you know, producing land management plans, that's not really necessarily our role. We want to be able to support the agricultural community to be able to develop in the way that helps regenerate the environment.
Thank you,
Okay,
Helen.
yeah, thank you, Helen. Very interesting.
Nigel, would you like to come in with a comment or a question at this point? Nigel Pugh.
Hi, Helen. It's Nigel here from Coed Cadw, the Woodland Trust in Wales. I've been really involved with natural flood management and the implementation of and influencing the sustainable farming scheme, particularly with things like hedges and edges. But this is a particular question with large-scale land ownership and the Brecon Beacons mega catchment project. How was it brokered, or how successful was the Brecon Beacons mega catchment at successfully brokering those interventions on the landscape scale of Banau Brycheiniog? Was there good results in the end?
So the Brecon Beacons mega catchment programme is obviously a WE Cymru led project that we are one partner of many. As far as I understand, the project is still ongoing, and there are a range of projects that are emerging from that and will continue to emerge. So part of that is peatland restoration. There's a project with Beacons Water Group who I was meeting with tonight to develop catchment-friendly farming and to farm in a manner that retains water in the soil. In terms of natural flood management, that level of, I mean, there are many different interventions that we can utilise, aren't there? Tree planting is probably the one that causes the most level of challenge when we talk about land use change. We know that there are large areas of our uplands are owned by single landowners, but have grazing rights associated with them, and those grazing rights are obviously, the interest of the grazing community, the graziers, is obviously really, really significant, and so it's not a straightforward situation to be in. I'm not entirely sure if I would say that it's failed in terms of, I've just seen your comment in the chat. I'm not sure it's failed. I think it's a really challenging area of land management, and that those conversations continue and progress and will continue to progress. And hopefully we'll get to a point where the SFS and the new collaborative element of SFS will hopefully help to bring about and to incentivise changes in land use practice, which will be better towards the retention of water in our upland areas.
the collaborative aspect of the sustainable farming scheme is going to be critical on multiple areas, even with kind of collaborative businesses, collaborative natural flood management. There's a lot to be had within the collaborative tier that would support wellbeing economics. And I really hope to see some good positive outcomes to come from it. But as we know, funding is a big problem.
Yeah,
Thank
totally.
you.
Nothing's going to happen if we don't value the way that we need to manage the land in an appropriate way. And I think that is the issue, that at present we don't value land in the way that needs to be considered.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, key point there. Thank you, Nigel. Marcus, I'd love to bring you in.
Thanks, Dawn. Nigel just said that funding is a huge problem, and we certainly all know that. Government has no money, and it's very difficult to persuade the private sector to take constructive steps without damaging their profits. So a question for Sean. When you talked about habitat restoration, you talked about road and rail programs. I found it deeply frustrating over many years trying to persuade the railway authorities at the time and the road authorities at the time to stop this blanket cutting down of trees. Is there any option that you've looked at, or indeed that anybody has looked at, for a collaborative partnership arrangement with road owners and rail owners to, instead of just cutting down everything in sight, to take a more constructive, collaborative approach and put something better in its place to replace the trees that they feel duty bound for safety reasons, arguably, to cut down? Has that approach been tried with these bodies?
Yeah, so that there is a requirement if there's a removal of any number of trees to provide an additional amount of trees over and above that which has been removed in the initial clearance works. But I think the interesting thing that's happening at the moment is that if you look at road and rail, they are fantastic connectors with the environment. They're fantastic ways of linking one habitat to another, and they're also very much undisturbed spaces. So from that perspective, they're good for two things. One is ecological connectivity, but the other one is they are really great places to sequester carbon. So a lot of these civil engineering companies now are also on a drive to net zero. So they also have targets. Government have set targets for to be able to reduce their scope 1, 2, and right through to 3 emissions. So what they're doing now is they're looking at, well, how can we reduce our emissions further? And we're currently, or we're about to start working on a large scheme over the border, actually, where all the biomass that has to be cleared to enable this scheme to happen will be taken through a plant, taken through our carbonisation plant. Off the back of that, we'll be creating these refractory carbons. The refractory carbons go back into the habitat restoration areas, and all of that carbon will be accounted for against the build. And the idea is to localize the construction as much as possible. So you're reducing the amount of things that are imported and maximizing what's there, but also interconnecting it as much as possible with surrounding habitat. So there's a lot more consideration going into it than they used to. And you're absolutely correct. It used to be you go in, you cut it down, you chip it, the biomass is left on site. But now people are starting to think, well, what do we do with that biomass? Can we utilize it in a better way? Is there another route for it? So it'll be really interesting. So it's very early days, I think, with some of the large scale tier 1 contractors, but they are making strong inroads into this, and we're seeing a lot more traction with the work we do with them.
Yes, interesting. And, public bodies and those kind of big landowners, like the railway and the roads in Wales, need inspiring to manage their land in new and different ways. And as Ken was saying, sometimes it's not these public bodies may own the land and they could empower communities to use them, or the community of practice and knowledge that's developing across Wales. We can influence those public bodies to make their land available and managed in a way that's serving the wellbeing economy, innovative ways, evidence-based approaches, but enabling and empowering these good ideas and change-making initiatives to happen at scale. Right, I am a little conscious of time, but I'm really keen to bring Carwyn Graves in to talk to us about food, because there's been quite a lot of discussion in the chat about agriculture, and that's where we started today's conversation. So Carwyn, please do come in and share your thoughts about the management of land as it relates to our food system, and what you think needs to happen to enable flourishing across Wales. Carwyn.
Great. Yeah, thank you again. Diolch I bawb hefyd gyflwynodd gynefach, wedi mwynhau'n fawr. Yeah, so I'm going to just try and push the bucket a bit further now with regard to food history and landscape history. Not as academic topics. I'm not an antiquarian. I think this has real application to us now as we face the coming years. And I put it to you before I show a couple of pictures and things. I put it to you that we have a really key concept here. We're talking about structural things. We're not talking about tinkering around the edges. I think we were all very supportive of what we heard Ken say and Helen say and everybody else. And I think the mood in the room is to see that replicated everywhere, as Ken said earlier on as well. That's the structural thing. That's not the tinkering. And so I put it to you that when it comes to food and farming, to a significant extent, we've wasted 70 years. I use the term 70 on purpose there, that we've wasted 70 years. And look at government policy in the 50s and then track what's happened in the food system and in farming and in biodiversity and in rural culture and everything else since then. I put it to you that with the framing of something like the wellbeing economy, we've wasted 70 years. If there's anything in that, then it's instructive to consider where we were roughly 70 years ago and what the underlying differences are between now and then. Let me just share a couple of slides that will hopefully elucidate a bit more what on earth I'm on about. Firstly, on the positive, yeah, the idea of a food culture. So I've mashed a couple of slides together this evening. So, but the idea of a food culture, that phrase Welsh food culture, I love bandying it around because nobody else, I don't think, has ever used it, and it jars a little bit, and that's on purpose. A renewed Welsh food culture, that's the cover of my book. You see there isn't a lamb on there. That's on purpose. There are oysters on there. That's on purpose. How we think about these things matters enormously. The renewal of a Welsh food culture has the potential to be an enormous win-win situation. And it's actually not something we can afford as biological beings that need to eat. It's not something that we can afford not to succeed in. So the win-wins, I mean, I spell it out there, you know, in terms of resilience, in terms of keeping value local, in terms of creating meaningful employment. What was David Graeber's phrase about jobs? Some of you know the answer to that. In terms of a varied diet, in terms of seasonality as well, and the difference that can make to affordability. I realize some people may be thinking, yes, pie in the sky. But if we don't take this seriously as the space that we need to work in, we are asking questions of our children and their ability to feed themselves as adults that we should not be asking them. I say this as a father of 2 young children. An example of what I mean here, I don't want to stay conceptual. Oats. Oats have fed people in this part of the world for thousands of years. And in all likelihood, will be doing so again in a much bigger way in the future. Ceirdi Bach on the screen there, top left, that is a native strain of oats to Ceredigion. It's been tested genetically. The strain is unique. It probably goes back to the Bronze Age. We can't know for sure. Nobody was doing DNA tests in the Bronze Age. there's so much could be said. Llymru on the top right there is a fermented dish. There are loads of older people. I've met many of them in the western half of Wales who remember this dish growing up. We now know about the benefits of fermented dishes for gut health. Snapshots about onto the relevance of oats. Why oats? I assume most of you know this. Oats grow well where wheat will not grow. It's a much more resilient grain. We've lost the infrastructure, we've lost the skills, and we've lost the habit of eating oats. Let's zoom out from food to farming and look at historic patterns. That map is up there. That's an Ordnance Survey map from the 1880s. It shows the orchard town of Talgarth. Yes, you can see the little trees around the town. But what I want you to do is to look at that map and imagine being in the town. There are apple trees, pear trees, plum trees everywhere. They're everywhere. And you leave the town, you go into the countryside, and more or less every farm, certainly every other farm, has significant land under orchards that is also grazed. Have a look at tide maps, they're available online. Orchards in Wales were grazed. We're talking about short supply chains in this agricultural economy that used to exist. It's not the one that we'll have in the future, but there are things we can learn from it. And it's a non-fossil fuel farming and food economy. So this is about understanding how we got here, how we got to where we are now, yes, but also how we got to the place we got to before we adopted fossil fuels, because there are deep things there that are actually to do with biophysical reality and that we simply need to take seriously again. So knowing the land. That is not a part of Canada rewilded or whatever. That is in mid Wales, that picture there. Apart from the pine trees, it's land in good ecological health. It's farmed land. And it looked very similar to that 150 odd years ago. There are things here we could say, you'll have to read my book, about Threave, which was mentioned earlier, about horse, about the difference between a mice and a kye. These are all Welsh agricultural terms. But the underlying dynamics are to do with patterns of extensive grazing with a lot more cattle and a little bit less sheep, are to do with use of woodland, intense use of woodland actually, and woodland products of all sorts. And it was heartening to hear Sean talking about that earlier. And most of all, I put it to you, this is about human knowledge. TEK is an academic term, but stands for traditional ecological knowledge. A massive, massive thing when you're talking about Indigenous peoples in the global South. But there is something of that that we still have access to here in Wales. A lot of it encoded in the language, and some of it, the very last vestiges of it, still in some people's minds and bodies, actually, on the land here in Wales. Again, if you disagree, read my book first, and then we can talk about it. Knowing the land, question mark. We think we know the land because we've got it all mapped and we've got GIS and this, that, and the other. But that field, it's a poor picture, sorry, but that field of crops is part of a 30-acre holding in Ceredigion on grade 4 land. It's land that is counted by every measure as not croppable, but it's land that also employs several people full time, makes an income, and feeds about 100 families. It's not croppable. It's croppable and it can produce a silly amount of food, particularly fruit and veg, with a lot of skill. And basically no fossil fuels whatsoever. A tiny, tiny tractor is basically the fossil fuel input. It's all organic. So what is this about? Yes, it's about human knowledge of the land, of place, and it's about nutrients and nutrient cycle. If you take the fossil fuels out of the system, you've got to worry away big time about nutrients. And that's where we can square the circle around feeding people, around biodiversity, around the place of animals, and around fruit and veg. This is all going to have enormously more weight as each year, as we move through each year and each decade. Welsh climate in 2080 in a sort of medium realistic scenario, puts us in a Basque Wales place. Look at the climate profile of the Basque Country, look at the climate profile for, well, I live in Carmarthen, look at Carmarthen, add 3 degrees of warming, wetter winters, drier summers, and you've basically got the Basque Country. It's a positive scenario in one sense compared to some. It's worse than the medium scenario that governments are using. Either way, this is about producing food. We've got to be realistic. But in order to do that, we have a skills gap that means we're not feeding ourselves now. And that gap is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've got to address it. I'm finishing now, but something that we're working on, and at the moment I'm involved in very intensely, is in Lampeter at the University of Wales, Trinity St David's. We're creating an entirely new sort of institute around the food system. There's a lot on that slide, but it's basically the idea of using the campus as a living lab. And we're putting food and education in food and farming alongside the humanities as a natural place for it to sit. The humanities is the long-standing strength of Lampeter as a university institution. So that's just a nod to that. Yeah, there's a lot more about this in the book that's coming out in March. So that's a shameless plug. But also, it's the first audience that I've shared this cover with, because it was only just shared with me the other day. And I'm very pleased with it. Quite beautiful. Anyway, happy to answer questions and discuss this, because I've touched on a lot of things there.
Thank you, Carwyn. Yes, it is a beautiful book cover, and that's out in March, so we will all be looking forward very much to that. Yeah, really inspiring and thought-provoking words there, and hands going up. So I'll say less, and I will invite some contributions and questions from the floor. Jackie, nice to see you.
Thank you. I'd just like to question and query about using anaerobic digester to fertilize our land to improve the food. Are you looking at that in your processes and research? Because I was really interested in Talgarth, where we've had many problems with a biodigester, being spread. But equally, when I spoke to National Resource Wales about it, they couldn't tell me which farms was being fertilized using this and how often that was. And when I've read a lot of research on it, it should only be done once every 5 years. And it's really a problem, because I recognize that most of these fertilizer machines are going around our area regularly and using the same areas. And I'm very concerned that no one's regulating that. As the actual land that is being fertilized. Is that part and parcel of what you're looking at as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, there's a lot of technical detail there that I do read up on, but it's not, I'm tending to look at things in a much bigger picture way. I mean, what I think I'd say to that is there is obviously a lot, well, it's not obvious, there is a lot of work going on right now about how you apply that sort of thing in a much more precise way, precision applications of it. But I think the even higher thing that I want to emphasize is, as you've put it right there, a lot of this, whether it's the rivers, whether it's how we produce food, whether it, the eutrophication that Helen referred to, it's about nutrients. And actually, we've got too much in the way of nutrients in the landscape right now. And there's this massive mismatch. We've got too much in the way of nutrients, but we're actually not producing enough food or enough employment out of the land. So at the highest level, that's what I'd want to put at the framing and as the problem that needs to be seriously addressed here.
Thank you. Nigel, final comment or question from you?
Hi, Carwyn. Thank you very much. I work with the Woodland Trust in Wales. Obviously, a lot about that is trees on farms, considering the amount of farms. But it's got to very much work for nature. It's got to work for water pollution. It's got to work for food production. It's got to work for everybody. But the overarching issue I struggle with, which I can't talk about much in my work, is the food system. And the food system is something that is raised a lot as being the overarching big problem. How do you feel about the term food sovereignty, and is it used enough as a solution to a lot of countries' issues?
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful term. We're using it in Lampeter as the basis for, the educational offer being developed there. It has a lot implicit in it. I mean, if you talk about something like net zero, which is a narrow framing around carbon only, but if you talk about net zero and you talk about the food system in Wales, you're at risk of only talking about the carbon that we produce when we produce food here, rather the embedded carbon that we import and export the disbenefits of to citizens primarily of the global south. And food sovereignty, I think, captures a lot of that quite nicely, because it implies something about us being sovereign here, but also, for me at least, it necessarily implies that other people, communities, nations, whatever, are sovereign as well. So I agree. I think it's quite a powerful term.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Carwyn. Thank you all for stimulating discussion. Always so much more to talk about, but Carwyn, Ken, Sean and Helen, you've done a great job this evening in covering quite a diversity of issues around how we manage our land and what the possibilities are to bring that land into service of our well-being, into service of nature. As Carwyn said there, land can provide so much for us. It could provide all our food, all our jobs. It could provide for our well-being in so many ways. And there are so many competing demands, and a whole history to unpick of how we've got ourselves into this mess. These forums are a really important opportunity for us to come together in Wales and beyond, to really start to think about how we can empower this transition to a more sustainable economy, to a well-being economy, and how we can change the way we work and the way we live. And we feel hopeful here in Wales because steps are moving in the right direction, which isn't to say that the job is done. There's so much more to do, and huge frustration, of course there is, but we have we're close to our politicians. We have some levers for change, and those levers are being deployed. And when you see the work going on in the Banau Brycheiniog, which is clearly leading the way, and within communities, that empowerment of communities is clearly a key thing about how we can bring our land into more beneficial use. It is happening, although not at the pace and scale that we would like to see it. So it's a conversation that no doubt we will come back to, and I'm sure we'll pick up the threads of this in other discussions as the year goes on. We've got an exciting programme of discussion forums to look forward to in 2024, and if you have registered for tonight's event, you are now on our mailing list, so you will receive invitations to future events. We've got an upcoming discussion forum about our education system. How must we rethink education to serve the needs of our emerging wellbeing economy? And we're looking at alternative economies in general, bringing together all those working in kind of new economics movement across Wales, to consider what we have in common, how we can collaborate more, and how we can work together to empower this shift to a livable economy. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I hope you found it an interesting discussion, and I've certainly really appreciated the insight from our panel, and hope you have too. Thank you for staying on the call a little bit longer. I'm sorry we've overrun, but we will let you get back to your evening now, and we'll see you again in a month's time. Thank you very much. You can unmute and say goodnight, and then I will end the call.
Thank you
Good
so
night,
much.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Stop.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Hello.
Bye.